What if I told you China is facing a banking crisis so large, so hidden, that even its own citizens aren't allowed to talk about it?
Yeah, we're talking about a crisis where people literally wake up to find their accounts frozen, their savings just gone. And the banks, they're pretending nothing is wrong. But once you see where all this missing money is really hiding, you'll get it. You'll understand exactly who gets hurt and why nobody ever saw this thing coming.
And make no mistake about it, this isn't the next Evergrande, no. This one is much, much bigger.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we have to look past the official story. We need to peel back the layers and see what's actually happening underneath all that spin.
So if you just look at the surface, everything in China's banking system looks totally fine. The official government story is all about control, stability, everything going according to plan. But, quietly, behind the scenes, something way more dangerous is brewing. We're talking frozen deposits, banks failing in silence, and massive losses that nobody is allowed to report. Because think about it, if they admitted there was a crisis, it would just completely shatter confidence.
Okay, but why should you care? Why does this matter outside of China? Well, it's simple. China's banking system is the backbone of the world's second largest economy. A problem of this magnitude, it's not going to stay contained within China's borders for long. And that takes us to the real story here, where all that missing money is actually buried.
And we're not talking about just one leak here. This is more like a crisis that's spreading through all these hidden pipes and channels in China's financial system. It's coming from multiple places at once. So, the trillion-dollar question is, where is all this money hiding?
Okay, so the problem really boils down to three huge leaks. You've got first, local governments that have borrowed just insane amounts of money completely off the books. Second, there's this massive, basically unregulated shadow banking system. And third, you have thousands of tiny, really fragile rural banks that are in deep trouble.
And the scale of this thing is just staggering. We're talking about a $7 trillion hole. And listen, that's the conservative estimate. You've got sources like the IMF and the Wall Street Journal. They're putting the real number somewhere between $7 and $11 trillion, mostly tied to debt from those local governments. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's almost half of China's entire GDP. Just gone.
Okay, so let's follow the money. Let's go down each of those three rabbit holes. Now, this is where things get a little dense, I'll admit, but stick with me because it's absolutely crucial for understanding the whole picture.
First up, these things called LGFVs. The easiest way to think about them is like special shell companies. Local governments create them just to borrow money for big projects, roads, bridges, that kind of stuff. But it's all completely off the official government books. And they borrow trillions, using land as collateral, with this unspoken promise that, hey, don't worry, the government will always have your back. But here's the problem. That collateral, the land, its value has completely collapsed. I mean, the money that local governments make from selling land, which was their main way to pay back all this debt, it just plummeted. It dropped 35% in only 2 years. So suddenly, trillions in loans are just unpayable. They've become zombie loans. They just get rolled over and over and over. Because if anyone actually admitted they were bad, the whole system could just break. Okay, next up, shadow banking. Now, this isn't like one big bank. It's more of a whole network of trusts, and they were selling these things called wealth management products to middle-class people, promising really high returns. Well, the collapse of just one of these firms, Zhangzi, vaporized up to $64 billion. And this wasn't some big bank failure you saw in the news. No, this was a silent wipeout. The life savings of over 30,000 people, just gone.
And that brings us to the third leak, the rural banks. The Hannan crisis is a perfect case study. Back in 2022, almost $6 billion in deposits just get frozen. The excuse? Oh, it's just a system upgrade. So when thousands of people protested to get their life savings back, they were met with a violent crackdown. And the government's solution? Not a bailout. It was to force over 290 of these failing banks to merge. Basically, they just hid the problem instead of actually fixing it. If you're finding this breakdown useful, subscribe. It helps us dig deeper into stories nobody else explains clearly.
So you have to ask yourself, when a financial system starts to crack this quietly, who actually pays the price? Because this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is a story with real victims and, believe it or not, some surprising winners.
Inside China, it's pretty clear who the victims are. It's the middle class, watching their investments just vanish into thin air. It's homebuyers stuck paying mortgages on apartments that are just empty shells. They'll never be finished. And as local governments go broke, they're slashing funding for schools and hospitals. But here's the fascinating twist. China's pain is actually creating a gain for other countries. Big companies are quietly moving their manufacturing out, relocating to places like India, Vietnam, and Mexico, all to get away from the instability.
So you might be wondering, how does China stop this from turning into a full-blown 2008-style public meltdown? Well, they have a whole toolkit of control. First, strict capital controls. You can't just move your money out of the country. Second, as we saw, they force failing banks to merge. Third, they have these extend and pretend policies, where they just never admit a bad loan is actually bad. Then, you have state-directed accounting, which keeps the official numbers looking squeaky clean. And finally, local governments would rather cut funding for hospitals than openly admit they can't pay their debts.
So the key takeaway here is that this silence, it isn't free. It comes at a cost. And that cost, that burden, it falls squarely on the shoulders of ordinary Chinese savers and homebuyers, the very people whose trust the entire system is built on.
All right, this brings us to the end game, the final critical question. Where does all of this go from here? Does China manage to fix this quietly behind the curtain, or is something going to break? Suddenly.
From what analysts are saying, there are really three ways this could play out. The most likely scenario is what they call a slow bleed. Think years and years of sluggish growth, while China just tries to manage the problem behind the scenes. The second option is a policy shock, where the central government in Beijing finally steps in with a monster bailout. And then there's the third path, the most dangerous one, a sudden break, where one big default is all it takes to shatter the illusion of stability and trigger a crisis that spirals completely out of control.
So here's the bottom line. This banking crisis in China, it isn't loud, it's silent. And that silence is exactly what makes it so much more dangerous. It lets all these underlying problems just grow and fester, without any of the pressure that comes from public accountability.
So let's just recap what we've covered. We're talking more than $7 trillion in hidden losses. We're talking about real people with their life savings frozen, or just gone. A whole shadow lending industry is basically defaulted in silence. And at the end of the day, the people who suffer the most are the ones with absolutely zero protection.
Which outcome do you think China faces? A silent bailout, a slow bleed, or a sudden break? Tell me below. Subscribe for more global breakdowns like this. And if you want to support Voice on Pages, the Buy Me a Coffee link is below. It really helps us keep making these videos.